Hello and welcome to El Pozo, the Primera Federacion show. I'm Nick Bell, your host for this evening, and I'm joined for the first time by Liam Bambridge, who is coming down the well with me on this brand new podcast we've launched here, all about the third tier of Spanish football. Liam, how are you doing this evening? Everything okay?
Yeah, very good. I suppose we should begin by explaining to those that don't know that El Pozo is the well, and the reason why we're calling the show the well is because that is how it's traditionally been known. The third tier of Spanish football has been incredibly difficult to get out of. It's easier than it used to be, but it is still incredibly difficult. So we thought, what else could we call the show but El Pozo? Delighted to be with you, delighted to be talking about Primera Federacion with you, and looking forward to the challenges ahead.
Yes, definitely. And obviously we're not new to the podcast world. Some of us are slightly more famous than others on the Iberian Peninsula, namely yourself, Liam, from your time on the Spanish Segunda show. Obviously, you're still part of that wonderful production. Have you got any more you'd like to share with our new audience? You know, your experiences of Spain and a bit about yourself before we get into the well?
Yeah, I suppose the key thing for doing this show with you and why I'm really looking forward to it is because I have been to an awful lot of games in Spain below Segunda and La Liga. I think I've been to nearly 100 grounds overall. I think the lowest level I've seen in football in Spain is about level 7 or something. So, you know, wow. It is a world that I love to inhabit. And so we've done a couple of specials, haven't we, before? I think we spoke together on a sort of a one-off basis last summer, and we also did a couple of shows, Alex and I, over Christmas. We just thought, why not? Let's go for this. This is a great league. Obviously, I love Segunda, but I think Primera F isn't far behind. And of course, Primera F feeds into Segunda. So I've always had half an eye since I started the show with Alex. And this is a chance to give it a little bit more attention, which is lovely. So it's great to be able to work on it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, for my own sins, I am a host on the Giricast, which is a Malaga football club, Club de Football even, podcast. And last year, as many people will know, we ended up down the well, a season in Primera. And I suppose that this, for me, Liam, was a bit like Stockholm Syndrome. I fell in love with Primera whilst I was down there. And like you say, haven't quite been able to give it up since Malaga were obviously promoted back to Segunda. And they've kept a close eye on proceedings down there. So again, like yourself, I'm really excited to get going on this project, this venture, and learning more about the Spanish. I'm using air quotes on a podcast, but non-league they call it, don't they, Liam? Does that give it the credence? I don't feel like it deserves to be called non-league.
No, I mean, it is in essence semi-professional, but do you seriously believe that Malaga were running as a semi-professional club last year? Do you think Deportivo were? Of course, we've got all these damn filiales. That's the first diss for filiales. I'm going to get in there, the B teams. And of course,
nice and
not remotely semi-professional. And of course, the key thing as well with Primera Federacion is that there are no salary caps. So if you do have somebody who's got money to spend, then you can spend whatever you like. And that means that for me, I think the notion of it being a non-league, absolutely not. I think quite a few teams are professional. And I was talking to somebody the other day, was saying that even the semi-professional teams train most days. So no, not at all. And because there's that money available, I think we've seen an awful lot of players who perhaps were in Segunda before come down into Primera F. As we're going to mention, that there has been a change in format over the last few years, which I think makes it much more attractive to players nearing the end of their careers. That there is still some decent money around to be made, and perhaps not such huge distances to be travelled, and a chance of bouncing back up again as well, which, as I say, although it is still for me pretty much like it is easier than it was when in the Segunda B days when there were 4 divisions, and ultimately, even if you won the league, you only went to a playoff, and so realistically, it was very, very difficult to escape.
Yeah, they've definitely simplified it for their better. Though if you ask some teams, they might not agree with us on that one, to be fair, Liam. But I suppose before we get into the ins and outs of how the league system works, do we have any soft spots currently? Obviously, you're a well-known Real Zaragoza fan. I'm a big Malaga fan, but any little preferences or, you know, side support for some teams that are down the well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, this, isn't it? From my perspective, I do love the minnows. I do love to see the minnows battle it out against the big guns. And I think there are still a lot of big guns, even this season, in the two divisions. There were even more last season, but several of them have gone up, like Depor and Malaga, for instance. But yeah, I love it. In group, we've got obviously teams. Barcelona, for instance, is a tiny town, sort of the northwest of Zaragoza, so that has a soft spot in my heart because it's which is obviously the province where my true loves come from. I think also you can point to Arenteiro, way out in Galicia. I mean, I think that's even smaller. El Caballino, I think. Camalino, I'm not sure exactly the pronunciations. Again, it's in Gallego over there, and I noticed that they proclaim themselves to be the octopus capital of the world, Nick. Spain?
Yeah, I'm struggling to think that because I'm looking on the map and thinking, is it close to where a lot of octopuses might live? I'm not too sure. You might have to tell me about that one.
Yeah, I think Galicia is very famous for its pulpo, and apparently El Caballino. I think it feels like quite an industrial. I think the official population is like under 15,000. So when we bear in mind that Amorebieta, for instance, a team's come down from Segunda, where from a town of about 20,000, Eibar 27,000. 13,000 really is absolutely tiny. So I love to see teams like that battle it up against the big boys. Those are the two in Group 1 that stand out for me as teams for which I have a soft spot. In Group 2, you've got similar cases. Yeclano Deportivo, tiny town, Yecla. I was there a couple of years ago for a Copa del Rey game against Granada, and lovely people, real ramshackle old ground, perhaps not the best playing surface you're ever going to see, but ultimately, some really good people, and they are punching way above their weight by being at this level. And of course, you then got, people that I know who support teams at this level now. Ponferradina, of course, Mr. Ponferradina, Chris Pigeon, great chap. I'd love to see them do well. So by definition, I want them to get back to Segunda. And Alcorcón in Group 2 have always treated us very, very well in their days in Segunda. And again, Alex over in Cork is a massive Alcorcón fan, and I'd be delighted for him if they at least stayed in Primera Federacion. Both of those sides are doing pretty well at the moment. And Amorebieta as well, a very small place, and they've had their day in the sun, perhaps had a couple of seasons in Segunda, and are struggling now, to be honest, in Primera F. Again, great people behind that club, and I'd love to see them do well. And probably the last one for me, Unionista. So I do love Unionista in Group 1, a fan-owned club, do so many things so well. So that's a fair list. Have you got any particular that you like? I mean, I know I've mentioned about 7 teams out of the 40. Of course, about 10 of them I won't mention because those are all filianas, but I think 7 out of 30 is not too bad. It gives me a wide range of possibilities of teams to root for. How about you?
Yeah, definitely. You've got a lot to look on there and to watch at the weekends, Liam, to get a good flavour of what we're going to talk about week in, week out. I think for me, especially being a Blackpool fan at home as well, UK based, and we've been in the third tier probably more than any club I can remember, apart from maybe the likes of Rochdale or something like that. But it's those clubs that have got big histories that have just been down there, sort of like religiously, and existed beneath the La Liga system, and occasionally had their day in the sun, that attract me. So I'm naturally talking like your Hercules over in Alicante, your Recreativo de Huelvas. You mentioned Unionistas, obviously they're a reformation from the old Salamanca team. So it's ones like that where I think like I've got maybe just a slight affinity for them, because I like the story and the history that they come with them, and that they're not maybe, you can have your Real Madrids and your athletic clubs, but give me a Huelva any day of the week.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, these are teams that have, as you say, occasionally made it right up, haven't they, to La Liga, but generally have existed below that and have fallen on much worse times than where they are now. I think both Hércules and Recreativo have been at least Segunda F and perhaps lower than that. So at least 4th tier, and both have had significant financial issues, as so many clubs in Spain seem to have. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And you have a big fan. You're a big fan, aren't you? A team over on the African Peninsula. I think it's got more than a bit to do with their kit, though, hasn't it?
It is, yes, and I know this is probably going to be a split in the road for us, Liam. Early friction on the podcast, what has been quite cordial so far. But yes, I'm a big admirer of all things Ceuta. They've obviously got beautifully wonderful Macron kits, and I am a avid shirt collector, and I think at the minute Macron are chef's kiss as they are doing things. And they've just released this beautiful collaboration with Pompey. There's been a similar one with Racing Santander for their 112th anniversary shirt. and it's just incredible. But even when their fans came over, I was fortunate enough to friend of the podcast, Matt Harrison, who I do the Geary cast with. He went over to the Enclave, got to spend time with their fans, broke bread with them, was invited with their ultras. Again, I'm using air quotes on a podcast. And when they came over to visit La Rosaleda last year, they were brilliant, and they were so happy just to be there and to be watching the football. And it helps that they're a pretty good side as well, let's not forget. But I believe there are reasons why they might be a bit more significantly, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say invested. Is invested the right word?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it, really? Because ultimately, like you say, it's an enclave in Africa. It's not necessarily the most appealing prospect if you're a professional footballer, in terms of it's how you've got to get to and from it. Over there, I think most people will be traveling inland for training, for games, etc. So, investing a lot of time and hassle to get there. And with that in mind, I'm pretty sure that the local government gives some fairly substantial subsidies to. So it looks like a really glorious fairy tale. Be a possibility to wonder if they have been really good over the last couple of seasons, and they may well break through at some point and to the second tier. But yeah, they do have significant government investment, I believe, behind them. And with that in mind, it's perhaps not quite such a fairy tale as some would believe. But yeah, listen, I think the key thing that switches me onto teams is the fans that get behind their club, and this is what I love about Tarazona, and I love about Alentejo, and some of the smaller clubs where the locals are really into it. I think there are other teams, small teams, where the locals aren't so much into it. And I haven't got an awful lot of time for those clubs, although I feel sorry for them. I feel irritated that they don't get more support, and I don't feel that they deserve, perhaps, as a fan base, to go up, which is really unfair on the ones that do support them week in, week out. But you can sometimes feel when you go to a Spanish town that everyone's behind them, and I think that's the sense you got, although it's an enclave rather than a town, isn't it? The sense I got from when I saw what Matt experienced over in the theatre was that all the locals behind him, and as you say, incredibly friendly, welcoming people, and came over to Malaga, and it looked great. So yeah, from that point of view, yeah, I certainly think that it would be lovely for them to continue to do well, but I think it isn't quite all that it seems on the surface. It's a little club, battling against the odds.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a few nuances like that in this league, and I'm sure we'll come up against them in future episodes. People like Intercity, for example, just to name drop. But I suppose we best move on to explain how this league system works, because we've kind of already given it a bit of a nod. It's not your traditional, 3 go up, 3 go down. It's a bit more complex than that, isn't it, Liam, in terms of you've got your regionalized. So again, similar to if you were to go down to the National League system, and you've got National League North, National League South. You've got a North and South system at the moment, but that line is then drawn pre-season. It could be East and West. It could be, well, there isn't any more options than North, South, East and West, but it's quite interesting because the geography of Spain really lends itself to creating quite interesting divisions, don't they?
Yeah, it does. I suppose you could do northeast to southwest. I mean, yeah, they just look at the teams, don't they, and try and split them even. And of course, we know the size of Spain means that you will get some fairly local games in there. But it always interests me. I mean, one of the reasons why I particularly became hooked on Primera Federacion was because I was going over to Spain to go to Segunda games, and quite often the way the scheduling works, you can't go to 2 Segunda games, or they happen at the same time or something. So Primera Federacion seems like a good backup for a second game, over the weekend, or even a third game or whatever. But you realise that Spain is a really big country, and sometimes you can go to an area and there's actually not much Primera Federacion there. For instance, in the Malaga area, I think if Antequera, for instance, are away, we might talk about them a bit later possibly, then there isn't an awful lot anywhere near to go to, is there really? And so there are some good matchups there, and it is enjoyable to get some. And what I love about Primera Federacion as well is the fact that it just feels a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more, a little bit less strict with the rules, etc. In terms of access to the players, and just when you get in contact with the clubs, they seem genuinely pleased that you've come along. Whereas by the time you get to Segunda, it's all a little bit more precious and a little bit more intense and a little bit more prohibitive, I would say, in terms of the complete interaction with clubs that you'd love to have.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely spot on there, that it isn't as dictated by other agendas is probably where I'm going to explain it, because obviously, as me and you know, at the moment we're waiting for fixtures to be announced for towards the end of March, start of April. If you are following a La Liga club or a Segunda club, often this is dictated around television rights or when a team is playing in Champions League or something like that maybe. Whereas in Primera F, you get 6 months in advance or thereabouts. You could be planning your entire season out right in front of you. And that's the thing I really loved last year. The first time really getting to plot when you can go to and taking advantage of the fact that you can book flights in advance, you can book hotels, so it makes the cost of it cheaper. And I think that's a good thing as well, really, when you look at the level of football that you're getting, because it's not bad. You would expect it to be a subpar product, but for me, it really, really isn't. And everyone wants to get to the promised land of Segunda. Yes, of course, that's where the finance is. But for me, it's brilliant.
Yeah, I'm afraid I got bad news for you there, Nick. Obviously, as you haven't been in Primera F this season, they've gone worse now than Segunda. So those twice a season, releases they did before, which is a massive advantage that they had. We are aware, perhaps, of a certain amount of friction, shall we say, between the RFEF and La Liga. Obviously, La Liga run by Javier Tebas, lovely chap. And so I felt last season it was almost like kind of a little bit of a one-upmanship from Primera F that they did announce their fixtures. As you say, I think there was a release, wasn't it, in August and another one in December. That was absolutely fantastic. And then really sadly this season, for some reason, I have no idea why, they've gone back to how things have generally always been done in Spain. And in fact, I think they're even worse at the moment, as we're talking now, in terms of how far ahead they are with Primera F fixtures. And that's one of the very few ways in which I think this level of football has moved backwards. But it's not, I guess, all about us international travellers. There must be good reasons for it. But yeah, it's a real minus this season after, as you say, a real plus the previous season when you could plan well in advance. So who is going up from? You talked about reaching the promised land of Segunda. How do you get out of the Pozo at this stage? What does it take to make it to Segunda? I know a lot of people know already, but for anybody who's not really that familiar with this league, where do we stand in terms of promotion and relegation from this league?
I'm still contemplating the heartbreaking news I've just received, Liam. I don't know whether to pull the plug on this podcast or not right now, because I'm devastated. But no, it's still a wonderful product, and hopefully it will move back forward again. But in terms of getting promoted out of here, as we've mentioned, you are into two separate leagues, like say Grupo Uno and Grupo Dos, split regionally depending on where the amount of teams that you can fit into a 20 league system you can get into. The top per team get promoted automatically. That is in both sides of the split. So whoever is number one in Grupo Uno and who's number one in Grupo Dos go automatically up to Segunda. They also get to play each other in a fun little playoff for some reason. But again, it's nice to see. The playoffs a bit more complicated, Liam, because you're then down to 4 teams in the playoffs, which means you are 1 to 5 in the promotion picture. But then when you get to the end of the season, this is where we had a lot of fun doing the podcast on the Segunda show last year. The leagues merge ever so slightly. So whoever finishes 3rd in Grupo Uno will play 5th in Grupo Dos. Whoever finishes 2nd in Grupo Dos will play 5th in Grupo Uno. It's very complicated when it comes down to it. And actually, you can end up playing somebody who is either far better or far worse from you performing in the season based on which side of the divisions you're in, aren't you?
Yeah, I think generally the feeling has been that Grupo Dos has been stronger in these years of this. And I think you're right there. I think that I'm not sure that's backed up by who actually has gone up. I haven't really checked that carefully to see, which teams have eventually made up. Obviously, Depor last season are from Group 1. Castellon and Malaga were in Group 2, weren't they? Doesn't necessarily follow, but the feeling is that over the season. But then, of course, it comes to playoff football. Never mind that Grupo Uno appears to be slightly easier over the course of the season. It's basically home and away, isn't it? And if you finish high up in Grupo Uno, you are going to have a favourable draw in the playoffs. And it's it's knockout football, isn't it, really? So it hasn't really, I don't think, fed through to there being far more teams being promoted from Grupo Dos than they have from Grupo Uno. I think the brutal thing about this league is that 10 teams get relegated across the 2 divisions into Segunda Federación. I think that's because there are 5 regional leagues. So to get the chance of all of those 5 regional leagues being able to promote teams via champions and the playoff routes, that's 2 per league of 5, and the maths tells you that you've got to get rid of 5 teams from each of these 2 groups, and that means there's only 20 teams. Is essentially a 25% chance of you going down, and it also means that clearly there's not a lot of space, and what also very even leagues, there's not a lot of difference between being in the playoffs and actually being in the relegation zone. I think at the time of recording it's 7 points in Grupo Dos and 10 points in Grupo Uno. So literally you can be in 5th place and lose 4 or 5 in a row and suddenly be in the relegation zone. So it's pretty brutal at the bottom end and tough at the top end. But as you mentioned, the fact that the champions go automatically, that's a massive improvement for me and a massive bonus for the big teams that do fall into Primera F, because if they win the league, they do go up, whereas before they could win the league and still only go into the playoffs under the Segunda B system.
Yeah, and I quite like you were talking before about sometimes how there's maybe a bit more strength in one league or the other, and I think the fact that you had 3 teams from Grupo Dos and 1 team from Grupo Uno get promoted this season was quite interesting, with Cordoba joining Castellón and Malaga going through the playoffs. So again, it's that kind of jeopardy, isn't it, that you get with the end of the season, which is stressful, but it is half fun as well. But then, let's not forget that, Malaga did have to play a B team. There's a couple of other B teams like Barcelona Athletic that were involved in there as well. So you kind of got to get over those hiccups part of it as well. But yeah, it's a wonderful system. And as we've spoken about, there's some sleeping giants down there, as we've also mentioned. You mentioned before Antequera. This could be a fun time for anyone listening to learn that former Burnley owner, Mick Garlick, he is currently the owner of Antequera. They're doing very, very well this season. I think 2nd in the league at time of recording, or 3rd. Again, a bit of fun for Primera there, Liam. The fact that you've got this former Premier League club owner who's seen the benefit and the potential of a team in Primera and has come to spend his years on the Costa del Sol.
Yeah, it's just north of Malaga, isn't it, Antequera? They've got some work to do, haven't they? The ground, I think, is probably not ready at this stage for the possible promotion that they might earn. But yeah, a great story that is. They're obviously not a sleeping giant. They're a side that's really come to the fore in the last few years, and I'm sure that Mr. Garlick is very happy with how things have gone since he's got heavily involved there. I suppose the biggest team left in Primera F after the promotions of Malaga and Depor are probably Real Murcia, aren't they? They have not just a big stadium but a massive fan base, and certainly they're up and round about it, I would say, in Grupo Dos this year. They seem to be one of those teams though that whenever they give the chance to sort of steal a march on their rivals, they end up losing. So as a Norwich fan, I can relate to that quite clearly, and a Real Zaragoza fan, they're quite good at that as well. So yeah, I'm sure Blackpool are quite good at doing that as well. But yeah, Real Murcia certainly in contention in that Grupo Dos along with Antequera. And I suppose the big movers recent have been Ibiza, haven't they?
Yes, Ibiza on incredible form at the minute. I think it's 6 wins from 6 after they beat Real Murcia 2-0 on Sunday afternoon, I think it was, if I remember rightly. A name that people might recognise. Like I say, this isn't just a league of lower league Spanish players. This is a league of superstars. The once man of Manchester United's parish, Bebe, seemingly turning Ibiza into proverbial title challengers, Liam. It's very interesting to see, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we've got as the coach there, Paco Gémez. Now, Ibiza is one of those teams that, for me, they don't really warm the cockles of my heart. They have obviously been in Segunda fairly recently. And it's again what I said earlier on. I'm irritated by the fact that they seem to have been relatively ignored by the vast majority of people on the island. They haven't got a great fan base, and they've got a very rich owner. And you can see from the way their team is made up that it is full of former Segunda players, and Bebe being one of those until very recently. He was a Racing Club de Ferrol. I did say to a friend of mine who's a journalist in Galicia that when he left Racing Club de Ferrol to go to Ibiza, I was like, yeah, okay, so Bebe just doesn't like the nightlife in Ferrol. And he went, no, he's not a party animal anyway. He just wants to go to Ibiza because he's a bit fed up. You know, he didn't have a very happy time at Racing Club de Ferrol. And he's got 3 goals and assists in his first 4 games. But Paco Gémez has been over the years one of the most entertaining coaches, and they score for fun Ibiza because Paco is in charge, and I suspect that they concede too many and probably would do the same as I think he was there for a period of time in their Segunda days, and they just used to have, you know, lots of 5-3s and 4-2s and stuff, and yeah, brilliant for that. I'm not, as I say, massively enamored with the club as a whole, but I do think they're playing some wonderful football at the moment, and they've got a great chance. As I say, they've got some decent money behind them, so they've got a decent squad. Quite a few ex-Malaga players there, aren't there? And yes, they must be, you know, it's so much about momentum, isn't it? As we've said before, you can go from mid-table to top with 4 or 5 wins in a row, and that's exactly what Ibiza have done over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of attention is currently going on to the title races, which are in La Liga and Segunda. The fact that, you know, you've got 3 points which separate first and third in La Liga. I think it's 2 points at the minute, which are separating first and fifth in Segunda League. You could probably tell that more than me.
I think it's first and sixth now because Mirandés won last night. So yeah, it's ridiculously close. But and of course, we haven't got a massively close battle in Group 1, have we? Because Cultural Leonesa are kind of running away with it in that there's 9 points clear at the moment. And, you know, obviously because it's only a 20-team league, it's only a 38-game season, there's not that many weeks to go. I think there's about 10 or 12 games to go, isn't there? So, you know, that's a fantastic position to be in. And Cultural Leonesa haven't really had much of a history above the third tier of Spanish football. So, you know, that would be amazing for them to get up to that level. And it's a pretty sizable town, Leon. You'd expect to be able to support a team at that level, and it looks like this might be the year for them at the moment.
Yes, and if you are wondering, I'd like to know a bit more about Cultural Leonense. Go and Google a picture of their stadium because, as you know, Liam, I'm a what's the probably word to use on a podcast right now? A purveyor. Would that be the right use of floodlights? I'm a man who is obsessed with all things illumination when it comes to football stadiums. And Cultural Leonense, for me, have definitely got some of the finest floodlights in not just Spanish football, world football. The way the arc into the stadium from outside the stadium, seemingly disconnected as if they were like tentacles just reaching in on the side. It's a very interesting way of looking at things. And as I've already told you, I think this is the league of beautiful floodlights because you look at other teams like FC Andorra, you've got Baracaldo, you know, there's loads of them. So more than just football in Primera Liam. That's the more important thing, isn't it?
Do you have, you know, a wish list? Not so much a bucket list. I mean, I'm sure there's quite a few grounds like to visit. I mean, is there one that you look at on the TV? Once that floodlights, is it Cultural Leonesa? Is that the one you go, I've got to get there someday? Or are there others out there that they're edging it for you? And in terms of the whole experience, I suppose, I mean, do you see, I quite like the sort of, I mean, I love Aaron Taylor, just looks perfectly suited to my sort of ramshackle nature. And I quite like Atlético Sanluqueño as well down near Sevilla, which looks also a little bit kind of, it's always sunny there as well. I've never seen it raining in as a game in Atlético Sanluqueño. But yeah, is there one that does it all for you? The fans, the floodlights, the kits, is there one that you're desperate to get to next of all?
I think it wouldn't be far off being Cultural Leonense, except from Baracaldo exists. And Malaga played Baracaldo in the Copa del Rey last season. And, you know, for again, in a town which is, you know, or a city even, which is flooded with football clubs, obviously, namely the one big massive one, you know, the fact that they've got those, you know, passionate fans, this really quirky stadium and the floodlights which shoot up and then just peer in at completely right degree angles. I think Baracaldo definitely wins it for me. And their stadium's obviously brilliant and not too far from, I think, Sestao River as well, if I remember rightly. So that'd be the one for me to go and check out if I could. But I'd love to have a weekend of just watching Basque football. That's on my bucket list.
Yeah, I'd totally with you. I haven't been to Balacal. I have been to Sestao. In fact, Sestao is the only club, I was looking at the other day, it's the only club I've actually visited in Grupo Uno, which is horrific, but it kind of reflects how difficult it is to get to the north of Spain from northwest England. I know you have that same issue yourself, don't you? It's much easier to get to Alicante or Malaga or, even Barcelona, Madrid. These are all cities that are very well served from Manchester, especially, and to a lesser extent from Liverpool. But yeah, getting up to the north, getting to Bilbao, flying to Santander, etc., when you really only free generally at the weekends, it is quite tricky, isn't it? But Balacaula looks great to me. I really like the look of that. I've been to about half the grounds in Grupo Dos by contrast, because it's just a lot easier to get to them. Talking of Balacaula, I think they have had probably the standout player in terms of people who've caught the eye in this category of football this season. Marwan Sanad, and he's one of those players who I was watching the highlights, so I had half an eye on the Baracala game, and I was thinking, wow, who is he? He looks amazing. And it would seem that Athletic Club were also thinking the same about him, because they started tracking him in about October. And then suddenly, and I thought, well, interesting, but we've seen that before, haven't we? Players being tracked by clubs from a higher level. Sure enough, in January, signed a 4.5-year contract at Athletic Club. I think they signed him from Alaves. I was a bit surprised about that. Why didn't Alaves refuse? Obviously, Athletic Club probably paid a fair amount of money for him. He's already scored in La Liga, Nick. I think he came on as a sub recently against Girona and scored. So what a absolutely meteoric rise to fame it was for Marian Sanada, a young man, a centre forward who was born and raised in Primera Federacion. Well, not exactly, but he's been there very recently, and all of a sudden he's living the dream, isn't he? Really, which is amazing.
Oh yeah, and it can happen. I'm trying to remember the name of the chap who now plays for Getafe, who's seemingly having a brilliant season. He was at Ceuta last season. I want to say, is it Uche or something like that? I'll have to come back.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's Uche. Yeah.
But he's having
I
immense.
tried to ignore Getafe, to be honest. I mean, they're one of my least favourite teams in Spain. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it is Uche. Yeah, central midfield, I seem to remember. Really, really good player, and yeah, always destined to go higher. But really, I think he's playing, in Getafe quite regularly, isn't he? So yeah, tremendous. And that again plays to the whole idea that this is not a semi-professional league, like some of the teams that at that level in other countries. Perhaps there isn't that progression to a higher level of football, and we're talking exceptions, of course. Here, not every player is going to do that, but there are players who are being scouted, who are being watched by teams. A young lad from Barça Athletic who's mostly played in Primera Federacion this season, who's disappeared off to the Middle East, I think, for €4.5 million. Again, it is a league that people are watching, not just us as spectators, but scouts have got their eyes on this league and are thinking, there's some good players to be had out there. From a point of view of us watching them, what I really like about this level now, since the switch to 2 divisions, is that there's fairly copious highlights, isn't there? Find them. You have to go to RFEF on YouTube, but most games, if you go to it, if you then click on videos, you'll find 4 to 5 minutes of highlights of all the games. And I think that really helps if you're thinking, I want to pick a team, I want to choose a team I want to support in this league, but I'm not like to get over there very often. Then ultimately you do have that option to follow them with quite extensive highlights, relatively speaking. I would say for a 3rd division international league, I think that's quite an impressive offering.
Yeah, and it's really well covered. And if you do find yourself getting, really into it, like, some of us have done, the fact you can subscribe to a platform which you can watch internationally or in Spain, it doesn't really matter, for, I think it was €10 a month, and you could watch an infinite amount of games. Every game is shown on FEF TV. Again, well worth doing so. But as you've mentioned, Liam, that even the highlights, the fact you're getting nearly 5 minutes worth of highlights compared to your 90 seconds you used to get in Segunda, or even like your 2 minutes you get, watching English football at the minute. It's quite impressive. And I suppose if we wanted to point people in the direction to go and look at some highlights this weekend, we should maybe mention some games which happened just the weekend that has gone. The standout games for me, I know it's some down in our agenda, Liam. We're looking at Real Murcia got beaten by Ibiza 2-0 at home. Recreativo Huelva beat Hercules away 2-1. Unionistas beat Andorra 3-1, a massive result for the team from Salamanca. And Amo Morebieta, currently, or who were, rock bottom of Grupo Uno, beating Real Union in what I call the alternative Basque derby, because there's a lot of Basque derbies. I think this might be the most unique one, with only an hour separating the teams from Amorebieta and from Irun.
Yeah, there's some great games in there, wasn't there? I mean, Ibiza, you will have loved the Ibiza game because of the presence of, not just the presence, but the standout performances from a couple of ex-Ibiza players. Javi Jimenez smashing one in the top corner. It wasn't all that popular at Malaga from what I remember, but what a goal that was, the corner of the penalty area. If you're going to look at one set of highlights, if you're going to break your duck in terms of looking at Primera F highlights, go to the Real Murcia Ibiza game. Most of all, also because it was pouring with rain, which doesn't tend to happen in southeast Spain very often. That was a bit of a standout thing for me. But yeah, Javi Jimenez smashing one in the top corner. Oh my word, assist of the week, Nick. Alex Gaillard. Ball over the top for Bebe, kills the ball on the outside of his right boot, slots it in the corner. Oh my goodness me. I was like, who is that player? I had a quick check on the app because I couldn't see the shirts well enough to work out what the shirt number was. Alex Gaillard. So Jimenez and Gaillard still going strong. Might be a level lower, Nick, but still going strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes when I saw the Alex Gaillard assist, it was one of those where actually the assist was better than the goal. But take nothing away from Javi Jimenez. That is an absolute rocket in there as well. One of the goals that caught me that I think everyone's got to go and watch this weekend as well is, you may remember, a former Borussia Dortmund, FC Köln, Blackburn Rovers, former Champions League man, Anthony Modeste, who is now turning out for Intercity, a small team based down in Alicante. This spectacular bit of acrobatic flair, Liam, is going to give Intercity a bit of hope, aren't they? Because they are rock bottom of the league at the minute. But when you've got these kind of stars in your team, never say never.
No, exactly. Tremendous. They call it a chilena, don't they, in Spain? An overhead kick. Brilliant finish from him and a good draw for them. I think they rescued a point in an injury time against Real Madrid. Castilla pushing for promotion from that Grupo Dos. Yeah, there's plenty of old stages, isn't there, in Grupo Dos? You've got Callejon at Marbella, who's banging them in. Of course, also at Intercity, you've got Jürgen Lecadia, who not so long ago, well, quite a long time ago now, to be honest, was I think Brighton paid a huge amount of money for him, and it seemed that he was probably better at DJing than anything else. He's got, I think, 9 goals for Intercity this year. I mean, it's quite a bizarre situation. Intercity, not a very popular club in that part of the world, partly because everybody's generally of the opinion that there can be no legal way that they can come by as much money as they seem to have to sign the likes of Lecadia and Modeste. And they've also got, is it Insue, is it, as well, who top scorer in AFCON last time around. And it's like, I know these players are none of them in the prime of their career, but really, how are they signing all these players on crowds of sort of 400 or 500, and they play in a sort of a stadium on the outskirts, council-owned stadium on the outskirts of Alicante, and it's not a great place to watch football. And yeah, it's a weird one, but yeah, great to see Modeste, doing that for Intercity. We should also mention, I suppose, another one to check out, Yere Caranthon's free kick for Ponfe, banged in the corner, beautiful goal as well. But for me, the oldest stager of them all is the goal of the week, and that's Raul Navas. And it's again one of the games that you mentioned here, the Recreativo Huelva win at Hércules. It's just gone 1-1, 2 minutes to go. Raul Navas, I mean, if I'm right, Nick, 2 or 3 years ago, he was playing in the Segunda playoff final for Las Palmas, and he's slightly gone off the rails since then. He was at Cartagena for a little while. He's 36, so he's not perhaps in the prime of his career. But this one, he's definitely right-footed. I remember that. He's a centre-half, big centre-half. He's 30 yards out, bangs it with his left foot from 30 yards. It flies in the corner. He looks more surprised than anybody else in the stadium. I bet he's never scored a goal like that in his life. So there were some brilliant goals this week. And as I say, certainly check out a few of the highlights if you can, if you've got to spend 15, 20 minutes. And in fact, the games you mentioned there, Nick, Real Murcia, Ibiza and Hércules, Recreativo, those are 2 that contain some great goals, and Intercity as well. But yeah, quite astonishing to see Raul Navas do that from miles out. So yeah, plenty of entertainment in front of goal. I would just point you as well, if you've got a little bit more time on your hands, to I'd like to call it Hector's Howler, but obviously, as we know, H is a silent in Spanish, so it might have to be Hector's Aula, which doesn't quite work. But Hector Olive plays for Gimnasia Segoviana. Nick, he's a local boy. He's only 20. He comes from Segovia. He probably had family and friends in the crowd. he's a keeper, and he just smashes it straight against the Orense centre forward. He says, "Thank you very much," goes round him and makes it 2-0, game over. So poor old Hector Olive, Hector's aula is the worst moment of the weekend from a defensive point of view that I could find across the highlights. But there are plenty of really happy moments as well. So I hope you find some of those. I hope they're listening to me talk about them and you also wax lyrical about them. Persuade a few people if they haven't done so already to go and check them out on YouTube.
Yes, definitely, and I'm sure we'll find a way to point some out to you as well, and make it a bit easier to find them, because as you were sort of mentioned before, Liam, they are a bit hidden behind some Copa del Rey 2017 highlights, which I think maybe the RFEF need to maybe address if we're going to get our own way with this, aren't we, Liam? So, but yeah, I think that's been absolutely perfect in terms of the first show. We've told you who we are, what we do, why we're here, the how, the when. We've addressed everything, Liam. So
make my final mention of a couple of quirky things I found this week. Just tolerate me for another 45 seconds. First of all, check out Osasuna Promessa's scoreboard. I think it's an old style. You know, like they used to sort of slide the numbers in. I know it's only their training ground, but I mean, seriously, I think you'd be better off without a scoreboard, wouldn't you, than one of those where you literally just get the old bit of metal and slide it in to get the score. I mean, that isn't really what we want to see in Primera F if we're trying to make out of this league as a pretty professional, well-run league. It's a little bit amateur. And the other thing I wanted to mention was Jack Beer. Poor old Jack Beer. What a great name. American. He was playing for New York City reserves a few years ago. Rocked up in Merida at the start of the season. I mean, that's the middle of nowhere. What on earth is Jack Beer doing in Merida? Unsurprisingly, his signing photo contained a picture of him drinking a bottle of beer because, of course, Spanish people wouldn't necessarily get the drift of that surname. And it had to explain, yes, this is the same word as his surname. 8 games, 89 minutes, released, left. No more beer in Merida, Nick. Quite sad.
It's not really a beer town, is it? To be fair, if I remember rightly, is it more?
Is it not?
I'm feeling it's not. It can't be too far from Jerez, if I remember rightly. Like you say, it's in.
It's in Extremadura.
Is it? This is where my geography really goes down.
Middle of nowhere, Nick. Middle of nowhere. Extremadura is the only region in Spain where I've not seen a game of football, and I will make that jump at some point. But yeah, it's the middle of nowhere. As I say, I don't know what 25-year-old American was doing there, but his stay has been short-lived, sadly. So no more beer in Merida is definitely something that we'll have to hope we don't lose him from Primera Federacion altogether. But he's not there now.
Oh, absolutely. I tell you, and I apologise. My quirky things have hidden behind another tile on my agenda, so I'll have to come back loaded with some more quirky stuff for the next episode.
It's over to you now. You'll find some quirky things. You're the king of quirk when it comes to things like that. I'm sure you'll unturn a few. But those are the only two I could find this week that I thought were just plain ridiculous.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there are a few things like that as well. And there's good stories about some of the places. Like you mentioned about you wanting to go to Atlético Sanluqueño, and, not many people know Sanlúcar as a place, but, the beaches there are supposedly wonderful, but it's more famous for its horse racing because they do horse racing up and down the beaches there. So that's on my bucket list as someone who goes to Andalusia a lot and does a lot of exploring. So I'll try and find some. Say again?
What the floodlights like?
The floodlights there are quite interesting, actually, because I did note them in an article I wrote recently that they're not the sexiest floodlights in the world, but the way they are positioned, not in corners, is the way I'm going to describe it. They're kind of like halfway up the pitch and just beam out the ground about, must be 40 foot. They're ridiculously large floodlights for a very small stadium, as you've said, Liam. So, yeah, the ones I do want to see, though. And again, I know a few people that have been there and they've said it's a interesting experience, is the way it's been described to me, if you do go to Sanluqueño for a game.
Excellent stuff. So we'll wrap it up. Thank you for listening to us. And where can people find us? I think what we really want to know most of all is what would you like to hear in future shows? Because we're only planning to do this probably every month, but we would love to be able to bring to you what you want to hear. Can you let people know how they might get hold of you? And of course, tell them all about El Partido, because you haven't mentioned that at any point yet.
No, absolutely. A new venture for me to do more storytelling about Spanish football. So, if people are listening and do want to reach out to me, Nick Bell at BPL on X, formerly known as Twitter, but also _Partido _ES is El Partido. And El Partido is going to be like a great umbrella of things. So, we're going to be talking about Primera F. There's some La Liga stuff going in there. I want to talk about how great was Juan Roman Riquelme as an episode. I want to talk about floodlights and everything in between. So it's a great place to get in touch about the funky side of Spanish football, I would say.
Excellent stuff. So you've got the message. We hope you got this far. We hope to see you again at the start of next month.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all for listening. Thank you, Liam, for joining me. It's always a pleasure to talk through Primera with you.
Luego nos vemos.
Perfecto. Well, gracias. And I'll steal a tagline from yourself and your show. I'll say hasta luego, and we'll see you next time.